Hello and welcome to Zerocarbonista, Series 6, The Cow in the Room. I'm Ian Collins and this is your number one go-to environment-based podcast. If it's green, it's in. And here's the thing, Dale. I was expecting to start this and you not to even be here because you've been everywhere in the last week. And I thought he's not going to make the time for this. For his own, he's on everybody else's show, but he won't make his own podcast. It's been a busy week, starting kind of, let's go back last Thursday with question time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I gave up football for question time because I really do like the platform. I went to Stockport, kind of short notice, and then just all the madness began there really, because off the back of that, there was a series of Telegraph articles, 5 of them, one a day for 5 days. The first one was off the back of question time, and then it became, I think on the Friday last week, we got permission for a big solar farm, so they wrote a story about that. On question time, I called for the end of donations and publicly funded politics. They wrote a story about that, and it rolled all the way over into this week. I think they wrote the last story on Tuesday, and then, blow me, Wednesday, Rachel Reeves announces support for Heathrow, and it was a day that went from 6:30 in the morning to 6:30 at night doing TV, media, radio, print stuff. You know, it was like a day from hell or a day from heaven, and I'm not sure which one it was.
If you're expecting sympathy here, that's the most you've worked in about 35 years, isn't
it? Well, and given that I like to communicate, I mean, how could I complain? It was like a feast of opportunities.
Yeah.
But by the end, I was on Channel 4. I was properly topic bored. And they put me up against this bloke called Martin Sorrell to talk about Heathrow. He was pro the thingy, and I was obviously not. I thought I was a bit ranty, but everybody said it was good. Because his argument, which he repeated, was that we either have a third runway at Heathrow or we have economic decline. And that's our choice. And like a patronising parent, he kept saying, look, it's okay. If that's your choice, it's fine. But there'll be consequences. I'm like, that's a false choice. Absolutely. Blimey. I mean, I couldn't even believe he said it. He had no facts. He had no figures about Heathrow, the runway, what it would bring, what it won't bring, all that kind of stuff. And it was probably a perfect way to end the day.
What I thought the funniest takeout for me of the third runway was that to build it, they would have to knock down British Airways headquarters.
I missed that. 700 homes, I saw that, but not.
Yeah, there's all the homes, but the irony that one of the world's biggest airlines would have to. Obviously, they would relocate. I mean, I don't know where to start here because there's so much. I mean, the question time. How was the audience on question time? Did you get a fair hearing? I noticed there was a couple of rows on there. One about Gaza was thrown into the mix. I also saw that there was the issue of you blaming social media for things that happen. I mean, you seem to bat it off rather well, but, it's question time. You're meant to kind of divide the room a bit, right?
Yeah, I thought it was really good. I got a lot of great audience reaction. I got one negative audience reaction, one member. And really, I was talking, the guy next to me, David Davis, who, by the way, I was really surprised that I liked him. And he said the same thing to me. I thought I'd seen him from a distance at Brexit kind of.
Oh, the old Tory MP.
Yeah, he led the exit from the EU, didn't he? And I thought,
he's one of the nicest blokes and a really down-to-earth bloke. I think he's a former boxer as well.
And SAS apparently, but he never says it very often.
Yeah, there you go.
Anyway,
so we'll say it.
So he's next. That was being ironic. He's next to me and he says, I don't know, Trump. He's like, he's good and he's bad. We wouldn't have had peace in Gaza if it wasn't for Trump. I'm like, hang on a minute. Biden also claims the credit for that. But the two of them, between them, they can't claim the credit for peace in Gaza now because American weapons fueled the genocide in Gaza. That's what I said. Yeah. And then this bloke's like, what do you say? How dare? Yeah, in fact, he began that way. How dare you? How dare you? You know, that kind of classic intimidating kind of form of words. And he said what he had to say. And then I tried to answer. He tried to shout over me. And it was, a bit of a battle, but it was fine because it had to be had, right? It has to be said. It is, I think it will be proven to be a genocide, actually. It certainly fits the United Nations description of what an act of genocide is, and I won't shy away from saying that. Otherwise, more controversy, I described, I said the guy that committed that atrocity in Southport, just down the road from where we were, I said he was radicalized by social media platforms like those owned by Musk and Zuckerberg. And actually, he was armed by Bezos. He bought his knife from Amazon. And we were talking about what we can do to prevent it in the future. And my intervention was to say, look, we mustn't overlook how this came to be. A major contributing factor. He watched extreme videos on social media. He downloaded an Al-Qaeda manual from the internet and a recipe for ricin. He did all of that through online access. And I said, we have to control that. Ultimately, I said we have to make those people responsible for their content. That's simply how we do it. And it did cause a bit of a storm on the other side of the Atlantic in some media outlets. Like I'd said something outrageous. And I'm like, no, sorry, that's not outrageous, right? You've got to be responsible for your own content.
So question time was, yeah, I mean, it was quite fiery in lots of different ways. But then it was really it was also a bit of an hors d'oeuvre, really, for this festival at the Daily Telegraph, Daley spelled Daley, Telegraph, because it appeared they wrote 5 editions with a big old focus on yourself.
Every day, one a day for 5 days. I mean, I find that quite crazy, actually. I did other stuff in between, and I was talking to them as well. I mean, they came to me for the stories, for comment and stuff like that. It's been a mad week, really. Yep. It has. And yesterday was the mad day to cap the mad week, because it actually was the Wednesday and it all began last Thursday. So,
yeah. Let's just look at a couple of those stories then in the Telegraph that are worth having a little gander at. We'll talk about the airport expansion in a moment as a sort of separate thing. But you're flogging stuff to the Middle East, apparently. You've cozied up to the horrendous Arabic nations that are doing all sorts of terrible things, and they're going to give you loads of millions of pounds because you've rolled over and flogged them some energy. True or false?
False. It's false, but it was the portrayal of it. I was surprised they chose that angle, actually. So there's a little energy company called Good Energy. They've been in the game nearly as long as we have. We've been a quarter shareholder, 26% shareholder for a decade, something like that. And this firm come along a couple of months before Christmas, said they were thinking of making a bid. And I think about a week ago, they actually made a bid. It was on the Monday of that mad media week, actually. They made a bid. And we said we would support it. We were quite glad to get out of Good Energy. It changed a lot in the years since that, we bought our shares and stuff, and it seemed to make sense. So this reporter gets on the phone to me and he says, but did you know that the backers of this bidder is the United Arab Emirates, and they've got a terrible human rights record or something like that? And so we started a conversation about human rights records, and I pointed out that that's true of the whole of the Middle East, particularly if you look at what's happening in Gaza, right? I won't stop saying it. Also said, look, what's happening in America? They've got a human rights problem. And we have one here too. I was at the time planning to go to the Royal Court of Justice on Wednesday, which is yesterday now, about those protesters being given super harsh jail sentences for a peaceful protest in our country. I said, we have human rights issues too. So I don't know what you're saying, Jim, but the other thing he said, like, they're a petro state. You shouldn't be letting them buy a green energy company. I'm like, surely that's the best thing you can do with a petro state, get them to put their money into the transition to renewable energy. And he said, yeah, I never thought of that.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought that's the first thing you'd think of. If you're a journalist, you're going to ring a bloke who, owns, or in this case, part owns a green energy company, and they're selling to a petro state. The first thing you would go is, is this? The first question was, is part of your idea here to try and, win over the petro mentality to a kind of green mentality? And I mean, journalistically, I think that's probably where you would go first. But you were dealing with maybe a journalist that's not up to that.
Well, it's a Telegraph, and they want to write negative pieces about me. I will say, in fairness to them, they take my responses and they do use them. So it's a reasonably balanced outcome. But their approach is always coming from that negative place.
Well, they also, maybe they were suggesting you needed the 25 million for another story that they printed, that you've got your own problems after your vegan gas project went up the shitter. I don't think they wrote it like that.
I don't think that was the headline. But I mean, what happened there was I thought you were going to talk about divorce, because they also came to me to talk about that and said, "What are you going to spend the money on?" Blah blah. And I said, "It's not my money. Actually, the shares don't belong to me. They belong to Ecotricity." But anyway, this story. They jumped on our accounts. We put them out one day, and the next day, the Telegraph are writing a story about it as if we're a FTSE 100 company. And they wrote this big story about how we've had a terrible year. We've gone from, I don't know whether it was like a 25 million profit to a 7 million loss. And they said a contributing factor to that loss and this I thought was funny because they can't do maths, is a 12 million write-off of a vegan gas project. I'm thinking 12 million write-off, 7 million loss. It's only a contributing factor. I think it's the other way around. Anyway, and they made a big deal of it in the article, like just everything in our accounts. Then they got to the end and they said, but Ecotricity is a tiny little energy company with a point-something% market share, that they're not important. And I thought, but important enough to write this big piece, having jumped on our accounts 24 hours after they land at company's house.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing some poor work experience kid was told to do. Go through the accounts. Anything you can find on there, let us know. Poor Swine was probably at it for 3 days.
I don't know. They only had 24 hours. It was like that, like we're FTSE 100. Honestly, it's incredible. But they end the article by saying we're not important. And I love that because obviously we are important. We've had 5 articles in 5 days from the Daily Telegraph. Our green gas thing is a problem. We did shut it down. We are rebuilding it. We are learning from it. We will have it back in action in a few months' time. I told him all that as well. So.
They did also jump on something of one of the 5 stories that they covered this week in the Daley Telegraph was something you've talked about before. And that was, you may have mentioned it on Question Time, your political donation position. Which I think is interesting. I think it's worth just reliving what your position is on that.
What did they say? I can't remember that one.
Well, they wanted to know more about the idea that you, despite handing Labour £5 million, you want to ban donations.
That one, yes. I just want to say the Daily Telegraph, it reads better as a joke than it says, right? You have to spell it every time you say it. Just want to say that.
Oh, 100% it does, yeah. I was doing my best to linguistically
You're doing well.
Kind of turn it. The Daley Telegraph.
I thought we should have used the Daily Mail instead. That might have been easier. But anyway, no, who cares? Yes, I mean, I had the audacity. They said it was rich, actually. I had the audacity to say that we shouldn't have donors in our politics. And I'm like, well, surely it's like saying a taxpayer can't call for tax reform. Or I'm a donor, so I'm calling for donor reform.
Yeah.
My point is, we hate donors in our system. I think we do, because all we do is slag them off, or certainly the right-wing press. All they do is look for connections to say, oh, yeah, money for influence, whatever, that kind of stuff. We hate it. But we refuse to publicly fund elections. And so the point I made to the audience was actually, we could do it for a tiny sum of money. A really tiny sum of money, 0.0001% of our GDP. And I said, as a company, right, we turn over £500 million. We spend probably 5% of that on our people, not 0.0001%, but 5% on our people to make good decisions and run things well.
Sure.
The government we elect are responsible for vast sums of money, and it would be such a good use of money, £20 million per year to publicly fund our elections, have no donations, no influence or no suggestion of influence, take all the cynicism out of our politics. It would be a bargain, and that was the point I made.
And in addition to five times Daily Telegraph, the Today programme, Question Time, the incident on Channel 4, to cap it all, you get to meet, or I think re-meet, TV's Richard Madeley. I mean, talk about icing on the flipping cake.
Icing on the cow pat in this case, because I got off that show thinking, Jesus, GMB stands for Good Morning Bullshit. I was really quite cross with the way they approached it. They kicked off with the donor story, donor calling friend of donations like it was some kind of crime. I think it was him that said it was a bit rich, actually. And I'm like, I made my case to him. And then they brought in HECFEN, our big solar project that was consented last Friday in the middle of this mad media week, or at the start, sorry. They brought it up, and I think, what's her name? Susanna, is it, that's with him, his co-host?
Susanna Reid.
Yeah, she's like, but kind of there's this thing, right? You gave money to Labour, they give you a big solar farm. And I said, well, I've got 2 things to tell you. One is you've just provided the perfect example of what I'm talking about, right? When we have donations in politics, you keep doing that. You say, oh yeah, because you gave money, you got that. That's a perfect example of why we should clean up funding of politics. And the second thing, of course, is like, it's a ridiculous thing to say. There are 5 big solar projects just consented in Lincolnshire. Ours is one of them. There are 9 more coming through the pipeline. There's 14 altogether. They'll make enough power for 3 million homes, which is a nationally significant amount. It's 10% of our homes, right? And by the way, I've been in renewable energy for 30 years. You might be more surprised if I didn't have a big solar project than the fact that I do have one.
Yeah.
And it's, went through an independent process. It was submitted during the Tories' rule here about 3 years ago, and it was largely consented in Tory time in government. So basically, what the are you talking about? I mean, this is a ridiculous
So this
thing
is
to
like
say.
the sort of suggestion is that you normally work at QuickFit, but you decided just
That's right.
suddenly I'll give some money to Labour and then I'll buy a solar farm because I've never
Or,
done this kind of energy thing before.
so get planning permission for a solar farm. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. That's a great analogy, actually, because it's like I said, I've been doing it for 30 years, right? You'd be more surprised if I wasn't
It'd be really weird. The question would be, hang on, Del, why are you not doing the solar farm thing? That's what
right.
people would be asking.
That's right.
And then they would say, cynics would say, well, you're not very good at this energy stuff, are you? Because you're not even trying to start a solar farm. Let's talk about Heathrow then, because this has been the big one this week. It's been sort of underpinned a lot of what you've been doing on the telly and various interviews. Is Labour's net zero credentials dead?
Is they or are they?
Yeah, I was hoping you wouldn't notice that.
Well, that's right. Keep that in, Kev. I don't think their credentials is or are dead, actually. I think, obviously, I disagree with them that we should have another runway at Heathrow. None of the arguments being made make any sense to me at all. Variously, we've been told, Rachel Reeves says, well, it'll mean less planes queuing in the sky, right? Nobody builds another runway that costs £25 billion just to get planes out of the sky quicker. There's no business case for that. That's not right. Also, the runway is there to enable another 250,000 planes a year to land at Heathrow. So that's just going to add to the queue. If the queue is taken away, there'll be more planes waiting to come in. That doesn't make any sense. We were told that we need to be a hub for people around the world to stop in Britain and go somewhere else 2 hours later. So they spend 2 hours in a terminal building, spend a little bit of money maybe, and then piss off somewhere else. That's an important role for Britain in the future, apparently, and for tourism. And already 3 times more people from Britain leave our country to spend their money abroad than come into our country to spend money. So that's not going to help us either. And then for me, the biggie was sustainable aviation fuel. The whole notion of it's an oxymoron. There's nothing sustainable about what they call sustainable aviation fuel, because we need all of Britain's farmland to grow plants to make this stuff just to power domestic flying only. There's nothing sustainable about it. It's not even feasible, let alone sustainable. So we had all of this wrapped up in the story of why we need a third runway at Heathrow with some questionable marginal economic growth kind of thrown into the mix. So I spent all day talking about that and why it doesn't make any sense.
Well, I mean, there is, for people who don't want a third runway, there is quite a lot of evidence to say this thing ain't going to be built anyway. Even the fella from Ryanair said, you wouldn't get a brick down or a slab of concrete until 2050 anyway, by which time the whole landscape of flying would have changed, as well as how you fuel a plane, one would have thought.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's right. Post the announcement, people have been saying, actually, if it doesn't fit within our carbon budget, then it can't go ahead. The Climate Change Committee have said we can't have more flying. They said that in the 6th carbon budget. The 7th one comes out in a couple of weeks. It's likely to say the same thing. And New Economics Foundation published a study that said if the one at Heathrow, Gatwick and Luton, if they all go ahead, then the entire gain from getting to 100% green energy on the grid by 2030 will be wiped out. And so that it doesn't fit within any kind of carbon budget, and therefore surely can't go ahead through the planning system. And then today, just to help emphasize that point, Rosebank, the monster oil project authorized by Rishi Sunak in a hurry, hoping to win the last election, was declared unlawful by a court.
Wow.
Because it didn't take into account the downstream carbon emissions from burning the stuff they were going to pump out of the ground. And that just caps it. Heathrow 3 can never go ahead based on these facts.
Yeah, and it's worth just throwing in, by the way, apparently, with all of this considered, the UK is still to miss its 2030 clean power goal. So that's not good news.
I haven't seen that story, but, it doesn't surprise me. It's a super ambitious target. But does it say how much we'll miss it by?
Well, I'll have a look.
Sorry.
The data from
It should be
Cornwall's
you
Insight.
asking the questions.
I know,
right?
exactly, yeah. A 16 gigawatt shortfall.
Oh, that's not very big. Well, it could
Solar
be.
is
It could
set
be
for the
50.
biggest underperformance, reaching 29 gigawatts compared to 45 to 47 government target.
Yeah, right. It's interesting because I spent all week arguing why 14 projects in Lincolnshire is not carpeting Lincolnshire. And one of the facts I shared with them is that combined, they'll take just 2% of the land area of the county, which is like, I think a really important fact. But look, I reckon that's probably like a 15% shortfall in round numbers without knowing what technology mix is in there, which means we get to 85%. If we got to 2030 with 85%, I think I'd shrug and say it would have been nice to have done better. But blimey, we covered a lot of ground in 5 years.
There it is. Let's do some questions then to finish on, Dale. James says, saw you on GMB this week, found my way to your podcast. If you want nothing in return for your donation to the Labour Party, then why didn't you just donate it to charity? Yeah.
That might not have helped Labour win the election.
I think that was the point.
I mean, that's what I wanted, right?
Chris, loads of others, by the way, saying, are you the Telegraph's new nemesis? You've been on practically every day. And on X-Rated Corner, Dale, B. Helena says, Dale Vince is always a breath of fresh air and realism, despite the haircut. Are you getting a lot of attention for the haircut?
Everyone loves my haircut, right?
Yeah. Walton Bonderer says, reference question time, shit, I'm sitting here agreeing with Dale Vince. It's time for bed.
It's time for medication.
Yeah. Blame game. Friday night is ladies' night. So one for my female followers, Dale Vince. Hot or not? You see, this is what happens when you make so many media appearances, Dale. It goes from whatever your core message might be to now you're nothing more than a cheap piece of meat to some of these people.
Oh, God. At least call me a cheap piece of tofu.
I was about to say, yeah, to pick the wrong analogy there. One here. What's Vince want for all that solar? Is he growing weed up there? Where's he got all his millions from? Bet you won't answer. And then they've added Met Police into this as well.
That's brilliant. That's just brilliant. I tell you what, no, I don't have to answer it, do I? I don't.
Let that one just sit there.
Smolder.
Are Dale Vince and Chris Packham long-lost brothers, or do they just share the same brain cell? It's not very kind from Mr. Miyagi.
It's a bit rude, Mr. Miyagi, whatever it is. But look, so. I think me and Chris are very similar, actually. Long-lost brothers. I'll take that.
Final one from Taste Swansea says, why is X or Twitter ramming Dale Vince down my throat on a daily basis? I'm not even chosen to follow this guy. Take note of who a platform is pushing in your face and question why. Then block them. This must have been done for a nefarious reason. Question everything. Wow.
I love it. Look, one word answer. Musk.
Yeah. Elon is promoting a bit of Dale on.
A bit of extremism.
Can only be that. Dale, we're out of time.
I'm so glad. I've spent all week talking and I'm done.
You don't have to talk anymore. You can put your feet up. Brilliant.
Now I'm going to play footy.
We will speak. Yeah, indeed. We will speak in 7 days. And of course, you can follow Dale on social media, twitter.com/Dale Vince, facebook.com/Dale Vince. And if you're ahead of us here, we're on TikTok too.
I want to just say on the Telegraph too. It's my new platform.
I like it.